Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now at the World Cloud Show, we're on the Cloud Transformation panel discussion on Cloud Transformation Roadmap, looking at talking about creating a policy, strategy, and adoption plan, supplement skills shortage, and seek knowledge transfer, integration of cloud and traditional IT, adopting a hybrid multi-cloud strategy, CX at the center of cloud transformation. How do we mitigate the challenges of virtualization? Is IaaS the most effective way forward? And how do we ensure compliance and security in a regulated industry? Joining us as a panelist for this session, first up is Shashank Saxena, SVP Enterprise Architecture, Retail Banking Assets, IDFC, First Bank. Shashank is an accomplished technology leader with nearly 2 decades of progressive experience driving tech strategy, architecture, and engineering of distributed platforms in areas like omni-channel lending, capital markets, enterprise technology, e-commerce, wealth management, and regulatory compliance. Thank you so much, Shashank, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Bhavna.
Thank you. Also joining us now on the screen and stage is Rohit, Dhar, the President, Products and Technology, upGrad. Rohit has a vast experience in building products and business ground up. Previously, he had successfully managed products for leading companies like OLX, Flipkart, eBay, PayPal, and StubHub. Thank you so much, Rohit, for joining us today.
Hey guys, Rohit here.
Pleasure having you here, Rohit. Now joining us on the screen is Dheepak, Rajoo, the SVP IT Head, RBL Bank. Well, Dheepak is a dynamic boundary-pushing leader with 21 years of experience in technology management, business and IT transformation, and program management office. Thank you so much, Dheepak, for joining us today.
Thank you, Bhavna. Hi, guys. Morning.
Morning. Joining us now on the screen is Saumer, Phukan, the Director Sales, India Key Accounts, Intel Corporation. An experienced technology veteran with a result-oriented approach, Saumer has led B2B transformation across various sectors such as government, BFSI, e-commerce, and the digital payment landscape. He's somebody who leads the growth strategies and go-to-market opportunities across Intel's client and data-centric portfolios. Thank you so much, Saumer, for joining us today. I believe you're on mute, Saumer, so apologies.
Thanks for having me here. Great to be on the panel. Looking forward.
Likewise. And ladies and gentlemen, now it is time for me to introduce to you the moderator for this session, Ekhlaque Bari, the CIO of Jubilant Foodworks. Well, Ekhlaque has 22 years of experience, and this extends across having worked in India and overseas. Before joining Jubilant Foodworks, he was associated with leading brands like GE, wherein he held various roles, as well as the HD Media as the group CIO and much more. Thank you so much, Ekhlaque, for joining us today.
Thank you, Bhavna. Pleasure being here. Good morning.
Good morning. So ladies and gentlemen, with this, we have our eminent panel on your stage and screen. If you may have any questions, please post it up in the Q&A tab. We take it up at the end of the session if time allows. But with this, we start off with a panel discussion. Ekhlaque, over to you with your wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bhavna. Good morning, audience. Welcome to the panel discussion on cloud transformation. I thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to be a moderator. I actually wanted to be a panelist, but they said you talk too much, and therefore thou shalt remain a facilitator and you only ask questions, let the others answer. So I have humbly accepted the role of the moderator, and we have a very distinguished panel today. We have a representation from EdTech. We have India's 2 of the top banks. And of course, we have the inside Intel on cloud transformation. So without much further ado, here's the first question coming up. There were several science fiction movies that came up in 70s and 80s, you know, Space Odyssey, Terminator, Back to the Future. And in these movies, the future was 2010, 2020, if you remember. Now it's 2021, and while the robots are not here from the future yet, but there are organizations and enterprises asking the question, should we or should we not go for the cloud? What do you have to say on that? Shashank, what are your views on that?
Sure, Ekhlaque. Firstly, happy Engineers Day to all of you. So, I mean, it happens to be, on this occasion we are meeting together. So, no, great. I think it's a very relevant question, Ekhlaque. We are in 2021, as you rightly said, but we're still kind of asking that question. I'll answer this in two parts. Firstly, depends on, what kind of organization and maturity curve one is at. So, as we all know, there were a lot of mid-sized and large businesses at the start of COVID. They were very cautious about whether to kind of over-invest in cloud or kind of be a bit more cautious and tepid. So, but I think the work from home kind of completely changed the dynamics, and that changed dynamics completely in favor of cloud. So that's one big story that has definitely emerged, and the growth is there to see. Startups on the other side, as you know, are very small, nimble organizations. They're naturally born on cloud, and they look at speed, scale, the staffing leverage very, very seriously. They are actually the real cloud first, companies. On the other hand, if you look at some of the cloud providers, I mean, AWS, where was it around the end of 2019 to where it is today? Is kind of a 6x jump. And if you look at the Google Cloud and the Azure, the story is much more mouth-watering. But they primarily bank on the O365 and the G Suite. But kind of it's a massive story for them as well. So net, what we are seeing is there's a huge percentage of organization on the cloud, right? And most of these budgets are increasing as we speak in the second half of COVID. But if you're a business which is not on cloud and still asking that question whether I should be on cloud or not, then I think my pitch would be like in 3-4 pointers. First, you of course can access data and compute anywhere, anytime, wherever you walk in. It's a big factor for any organization of a small to large size. Having an access to the modern tech stack, right, from big data to AI ML to whatnot. I mean, it's just a plug and play. So being on cloud kind of gives you that access in a pretty nimble and seamless way. Third, cost optimization. I mean, people talk about it that, in the longer run, there are different dynamics that evolve with cloud. But if you look at your non-production workloads, that's a clear story there. I mean, even the production workloads, you can kind of make arguments both ways. But for non-production, it's a clear winner to be on cloud. For speed of provisioning infra is again a clear area that a lot of organizations kind of scramble when it comes to getting large projects through the finishing line. And lastly, the scale. I mean, if you're really a business that needs to kind of tap to this whole digital, growth, the post-COVID dynamics of the changing normal, I mean, scale is what you need to grow your business. And being cloud native, having CNCF compliance, having an architecture which is right for cloud is kind of a clear area that needs to be looked at. So that's my perspective, Ekhlaque, on that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Shashank. And effectively, what you say is depends. The startups in the new age companies are already in the cloud. It's the earlier companies that have a mixed. And then you spoke about the multiple advantages that cloud brings. Rohit, what do you have to say to organizations that are asking the question, should we go on the cloud or not?
Thanks, Ekhlaque, for this question. Very pertinent question, but as I think my fellow panelists said, it's interesting to see into the 2021, we're still asking this question. So that's an interesting question by itself. Let me zoom out and give you a perspective in terms of there are 3 types of organizations is what I feel. The organization type 1 is an organization which is brick and mortar, wants to be brick and mortar, doesn't have any intent going towards technology at all. Second type of organization is brick and mortar, understands that there is no other choice but to go to technology and ensure technology is the way to go from a scale standpoint, but still and figuring things out. And the third is technology, completely technology oriented. They only understand technology and that's the only way to go through, right? These are the 3 types of organization. The first type of organization will never ever move into technology because they don't understand and they want to stay away from it, right? The second type of organization needs to move in fast because the more time they take analyzing and paralyzing themselves, effectively they're slowing down their growth, they're slowing down the opportunity, and someone else is going to eat their lunch. Then the number 3rd, anyway, is out there and they're pushing very aggressively. effectively will take away the lunch for the second one as well. So if an organization is still thinking that they need to go to cloud or not, I think it's a wake-up call at this point in time, knowing so many businesses have shut down, which were completely brick and mortar, or when they were in the bucket 2 kind of thinking, we'll get there. By the time they got there, it was non-sustainable for them to move forward. So because cloud not only gives you the benefit of just going online, it also gives you the benefit of scaling up, scaling down, moving across geographies, ensuring that you're available cross countries, cross boundaries. If you think of website, the load speed time, I can get in all in details of those. But my intent is, if you want to zoom out and think as an organization strategy, I don't know what are we cooking at this point in time. We need to go jump in, get into cloud, and ensure that that organization that I as a founder, co-founder, chairman, board member, whosoever I am, who's a strategic decision maker, needs to move forward and not twiddle their thumb anymore. That's my 2 cents here.
Thank you very much, Rohit. That message was very loud and clear. Interesting, dividing organizations into 3 buckets. And your message is jump in or you will get nudged out eventually, especially for bucket 2 and bucket 3. The bucket 2 will lose their breakfast. The bucket 3 will lose their lunch and dinner as well.
Right.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Very interesting insights. And it was a very, very straight answer. It wasn't like depends, so on and so forth. There's so many advantages to cloud. You shouldn't even be asking that question. All right, my next question is on marriage. Polygamy and monogamy. Not in that sense, but it is said that implementation of an IT application like a ERP or a CRM is like a marriage with a very expensive divorce clause, if there is one. So once you have implemented a core banking system or a big ERP, it is nearly impossible to get out of it. And if you have to get out of it, it's a multi-million, multi-dollar, multi-year project. How is it with cloud? Should people look at cloud as, as like having partners? One is the recommended and the best practice, or should people look at cloud as having children, where one or more is also okay? This question to Dheepak first.
Yeah, very tongue-in-cheek, Ekhlaque. It reminds me of what, Salesforce actually put out a tweet before the India-England match at the Lords. And they actually tagged their customer and they said, today's weather forecast cloudy. Your statement, reminded me of what they actually put out. But see, to be fair to the cloud service providers, I think, it's gone are the days of, companies trying to get hooked. Okay, it is time to get very serious about the relationship. If you're confident, I would say go ahead and start a family. But before, getting to answer that question, let me tell you a little bit about what we have done at RBL and what's the journey that we have undertaken. So RBL is, it's a very progressive, very cloud friendly, very mobile first sort of bank. Technology is very core to our, overall business strategy. We have co-invested with AWS in our, cloud transformation journey. And the transition has not come overnight. It's taken us about 1 year of pacing, trying to learn, trying to get our hands dirty. We first migrated some of our, website assets just to gain a little bit of experience. Then we did what's called as a 10 in 10, which is migrating 10 applications in 10 days onto cloud. That gave us a lot of learning. And we got a bit bolder. We said we'll do 40 in 40. And we're probably the second or third bank in Asia to achieve that feat. 40 applications, not just the periphery applications, but applications that are actually core to our business. Retail banking, loan origination, assets, digital collections, some of our mobile banking, channel platforms and so forth. And we actually did put it into cloud. And we took the cloud journey because, one, like Shashank mentioned, speed of deployment. That was key. And we also like OpEx, in a way it is cost neutral. It allows us flexibility to scale up and scale down. And also, the transaction volumes in the retail banking space is, significantly grown. For us, it's grown about 6-7x, and cloud obviously gives us a lot of flexibility. Going back to your question, is it one cloud provider, two cloud providers? We actually have, we've invested in both AWS and Azure. Our digital assets are on AWS. Our data assets, data mart and ETLs and stewardship, the governance layer, the reporting factory are on Azure. So, in the long run, RBL, we want to be in a multi-cloud environment, and we want to keep HCI as our cloud infrastructure background. So, polygamy is the way to go.
All right, polygamy. Well, polygamy or having more than one children is the way to go. But that was a very interesting, Deepak. 10 in 10, 40 in 40. That's extremely bold and that's extremely aggressive. And the audience, if anybody is listening, I know RBL CIO Shanky is a friend of mine. I know that they have really done this. And here I was talking about marriages, and RBL is busy with speed dating, 10 in 10 and 40 in 40. But your answer is quite clear. It is RBL's experience, a multi-cloud is okay and recommended way forward. Saumer, what do you have to say? Should organizations go for a single cloud or a multi-cloud environment?
Yeah. Thanks, Ekhlaque, for not making me answer the question. Is it cloud or not cloud? At least, I have a better question than that one. I think it's good to start with some data. So we recently actually did a study with a group globally called Enterprise Services Group. What you see is that in large organizations, the growth of expenditure in public cloud has tripled, okay, over the last 10, 12 months. At the same time, what's interesting is 55% of those organizations, and Dheepak kind of alluded to it as HCI, is actually also investing in the internal IT, the private IT, what have you, right? So what does this indicate? It actually indicates that there's probably the end state that you look at is probably what you call as a multi-cloud.
100%.
Right? Now, for us, when we look at it as Intel, the cloud actually is an evolution. It's an operational model, right? And sometimes you may decide to do a public cloud. Sometimes you may decide to do a private cloud. What actually matters is an evolution for 3 phases that we have seen when we work with organizations. We call it phase 1 when organizations are talking about a single cloud, right? As you take AWS or Azure, you may have a private cloud as well. Or you may have actually, sometimes you do 2 that you want to do one for testing and DevOps and bring it back to production. We call it phase 1, like a single cloud thing. For us, when you look at phase 2, you're really looking at multiple clouds. And Dheepak, you mentioned, right? We have invested in, AWS and others, right? What happens there is when you call it phase 2 is that although the applications are running on multiple clouds, the interoperability is not that smooth, right? We call it because then you're making the issues around interoperability in the conversation you're really starting to think about. Then what we call as Nirvana is the whole multi-cloud, right? What does it mean? It's transparent, seamless, transition on interoperability of data and transactions across multiple clouds. Now, organizations, they go through the journey from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3. And I think there are 4 vectors that organizations needs to consider, okay? Start 1, just because cloud is the in thing, you don't need 5.9 SLAs. So SLAs matter. Some applications may really need a 5.9, some may need a 3.9. We can take a call on that. The second one to think about is cost. I mean, sometimes the cost matters, and I hope it does, right? Because budgets are only going to go down, right? The third thing we should think about also is a question around saying, if multi-cloud is the end state, right? If multi-cloud is an end state, an evolution process is iterative, right? So you have to pre-invest in governance, tools, processes, so that you go through this conversation and do that. When you lead to a end state of saying, yeah, now I'm getting the interoperability that we want to decide, right? And then finally, what you really talk about is things like technical debt. Thanks to virtualization, which hopefully all of us are very familiar with, the refresh cycles for hardware and software are different. What really happens between the two is you create the gap, right? Where you're open to vulnerability. All enterprises, hopefully like us, are talking about uptime. Now, when you talk about uptime, what is the biggest risk to uptime? Cybercrime. Expected, exposure to cybercrime, 6 trillion. So how do you address that? So the whole conversation around governance, SLA, cost, and technical depth drives the discussion. I'll close the discussion on Intel, right? Intel, by the way, we are 100,000 employees. We actually, we're primarily we're 50 plus data centers, high, very good PUE, right? We are a very mobile set of employees. So we were used to things like VPN, load balancing VPN, what have you. Come hit pandemic. What happens? The VPN requirements for the organization went up by 3x. Were we able to do it in internal data center? The answer is no. So what we really did is we started using the public cloud conversation, right? For example, the high intensive workflows that does not require VPN, we put it out there, right? Like for audio video collaboration, meetings, Outlook, as Shashank mentioned about, what do we do? So once we put it out there, we were able, by the way, we are already internally a cloud first organization. We offered all services like an as a service to our internal employees, although we had our private cloud, right? So in terms of security, what have you, moving that conversation was easy, but I really want to bring it back to the conversation. It became an SLA conversation where we really needed to support 100,000 employees versus 20,000, just take a number. It became a conversation of technical depth. Thankfully, we have the security thing, but what does VPN work on? How do you really look at VPN to make sure we are not compromising on data? Because we always private cloud, how do you kind of go there, right? So we became that conversation as well. And then cost, of course, thankfully, all the partners, we work with them as customers as well. So we were able to work with the dynamics to get there. So in essence, start looking at the journey. It's all customized. It's a personalized journey, talking about the 4 vectors I talked about: cost, SLA, when you talk about a technical depth, and then you talk about tools and governance. By the way, because we have manufacturing, the sales, what have you, the processes had to change. Overnight processes had to change. So think about the tools and processes. You have not invested in the processes before, we wouldn't have been able to be there in those 2 weeks, 3 weeks that we needed to be out there for manufacturing. So again, make it a journey, make it the stages, focus on what's relevant to your organization. And by the way, why am I here as Intel talking about this, right? You may want to, one of the learnings we had, when you're looking at this VPN transition, what we realized is if we use virtual VPN to some of the functions that, people might have heard about DPDK, I don't know, it's called Data Platform Development Kit, or you could hear about single root IO virtualization, very common capabilities. You'll find higher capabilities or higher performance versus using, VPN appliances out there. So think about some of those capabilities. Just look under the hood. It may benefit in terms of cost, what have you. Back to you, Ekhlaque.
Very much, Saumer. Those are very interesting insights. First, from your conversation, I gathered that you're making a very strong case for being on the cloud and the many advantages that come with being on the cloud. Shashank spoke about it, Rohit spoke about it, Dheepak, and you have added to that. You also alluded to the fact that eventually organizations will end up with a multiple cloud environment. And when organizations get there, they might realize that there are some interoperability issues, much like, siblings fighting. And how do you manage them? And what you're recommending to the organizations is put your governance mechanisms in place and put your technical debt, not put your technical debt, but keep a process of removing your technical debt, all that good stuff, so that when you are on the cloud, things are taken care of and you are really able to reap the advantages of cloud. Now, from your answer, it actually leads me nicely into the third question, which unfortunately, Saumer, is not going to be positioned to you because you have partially answered that question. And I'm going to carry the marriage and the children analogy just a little forward because it's relevant to pose the question in that way. As they say, nobody can prepare you for marriage, right? You have to experience it to know. Nobody can prepare you to having children. The people have children, they will tell you, your life will change. But organizations that are going for the cloud or in the midst of a cloud transformation journey, what would you say? I know the learning will come as they experience it, but what are the do's and the don'ts and the challenges that you would give to organizations embarking on the cloud journey? Let's start with Rohit. Rohit, what do you have to say to that?
So I think you can broadly break this down into 3 major buckets again. The first is the scalability and security bucket. where when you say you are on cloud, that and cloud is secure, but it's a shared responsibility, and which means the cloud infrastructure is secure in terms of what they're giving you, but end of the day, you manage it, and your ports, if they're open, I'm just giving a little bit of technical details, then you are unsecured. So the element of scalability and security is something that you need to take care of. When it comes to scalability, the element of auto scale is again very, very important for you to understand if you are going to scale up, scale down, if you're in multi regions, support, disaster recovery, all of those are elements of scalability, security, and disaster recovery, all in the one bucket, which is an infrastructure bucket that you want to ensure you are sorted and you have certain protocols in place and certain SOPs in place. That's one bit that you need to ensure. Second, I think data, very, very important. When you're going in cloud, you have to understand that how are you, how many customers are coming in, how many customers are going out, or how many transactions are happening. And data can be again broken down into further three broad buckets. You're talking business analytics, you're talking data science, and then you're also talking about pure play data engineering. So that's another way of breaking that down. So you have the infrastructure, you have the data, which is, these are the two fundamentals that you look at. And third is your deployment rhythm, which means how are you putting it, whatever you're deploying, is there a train system, a sprint system, whatever system you're planning to implement, is that something that you've actually structured it well, you've planned it well, you're ensuring what new features are going in or what's not going in, you have a mechanism of rolling back if things don't work out. All of that is a deployment capability. So if I think of ensuring that, is there a way to structure our future on cloud? This is a broad three buckets that you can structure. Now I can go to level 2, level 3 details, but the goal here is that you cannot avoid any one of them. Some people say, you know what, data will come later, but I think the biggest mistake that they do is they're not understanding where the website is heading, where the app is heading, where their infrastructure is heading, because they are completely, it's like driving without a steering wheel. And then you land up in a place where you never wanted to. So I've been in part of, I've seen organizations where they had no clue of data. People are just claiming data based on their understanding and their hypothesis without actually knowing what real data is. So hence, that's very, very critical. And again, people also are very unorganized in terms of when it comes to deployments, when it comes to organizing their sprints, ensuring that because if, let's say, a new feature gets launched and that fails, they're literally running around like with a headless chicken, and because they've not organized themselves for them to be able to roll back, or they have a kill switch where they can turn off the feature. So those are fundamentals in my head when you're thinking of cloud and you're thinking of planning for cloud, and you do not have these three fundamentals.
Thank you very much, Rohit. Very interesting and deep insights. You spoke about scalability and security is something to be careful about. And you made a very important point there. It's a shared responsibility. Don't leave it to the cloud provider. Oh, our cloud pays security responsibility here, or it's completely yours. It's a shared responsibility. And you said that being on the cloud, break it down into infrastructure, data, deployments, look at these three layers and have your processes and governance managing this. Thank you very much. I hope that the audience will benefit from these insights, because these really come from experience, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel and go through that experience to be able to learn these important lessons. Shashank, what do you have to say about the challenges and the do's and don'ts on cloud?
No, I think I really concur with Rohit and would take some of his points forward, but would actually also want to add to what Dheepak was saying. He's my kind of buddy from a peer bank, and like RBL, I mean, even IDFC First is on a very strong digital technology centric strategy. Our CEO says we are a technology company with a banking license. So the complete mind shift is, there's a change in mindset. So cloud, being on cloud and, doing it right the first time, because a lot of people have made mistakes going that path. So it is kind of very important. So coming to the challenges, while we're trying to get it right, our entire digital bank is kind of living on containers today. So talking about the shared responsibility, the important point that, Rohit made, I think what is needed by the organizations to have for the shared responsibility, be prepared, have an internal cloud governance architects to kind of work with the business and carefully planning that out, have a solid cloud ops and engineering team, because you cannot just, like he said, cannot leave it onto the cloud provider. So you need to have a solid cloud ops and engineering team internally to kind of work with technology and get that kind of migration path sorted out and kind of really embark on that journey. The other bit is also about the application inventory. I mean, you need to really understand, like, talked about, I guess it was Deepak who talked about the 10 in 10, right? So it's important to understand those data dependencies, the application that you're running with, have those prioritization done and move it like a family. He was talking about 10 in 10. The strategy we have is take the family together. So if you have an application and that has a cohort of other applications which have a data dependencies, look at the family, together. So that's our strategy that we work on. We also don't try to force fit the COTS application, because it's in large banks like ours, there are a lot of legacy COTS applications. So there's a tendency for people to also look at, can I move, take my entire core banking or my loan management, right? So like also Deepak said, we are also starting with being the first bank completely living on containers for our loan origination, and followed by our core banking down the line. But it's a very carefully crafted strategy, which is in a stepwise way that we're going to follow through. There are other two important points that I want to mention about technical fit and business fit while kind of looking at the whole cloud paradigm. So I think, and that's where the importance of being the shared responsibility that, Rohit alluded to is very important, is that, the technology architects, the cloud engineers need to work out the whole CPU memory footprint of these applications, the whole OS compatibility, of the whole software licensing, dynamics. I mean, all of those aspects before kind of carving out the right candidates, I guess, is an important understanding how the database IO operations are happening, the latency between the network. To give an example, we are the biggest kind of clients of the largest CRM company in the world, and there are a lot of data center hops that we were looking at while kind of making some of those decisions for our digital app that is today on cloud native. So that's about the technology fit aspect. Talking about the business fit aspects, we also kind of partner with the world's largest e-commerce, the telcos and the internet companies of the world. And in that, basically, what are we looking at is time to market with our partners, time to market when they expand on a day, on a sale day, on a Dhanteras or on a Diwali, and how kind of we grow with our partners exponentially. And that's where, again, the cloud paradigm becomes very important. Can we also do cloud bursts? Like, when we need additional capacity. So at Morgan Stanley, when I was I was leading the grid computing team there, and during Brexit times, we could add 6,000 nodes on the day of Brexit at morning 7:30 UK, and I clearly recall that we could use IBM, Azure, and AWS to kind of do a cloud burst, and multi-cloud strategy really played out, right? So I think we'll have to really carve out those business use cases, right? And that's where the business fit needs to be very importantly thought.
Correct. So the business use cases are extremely important, and it's good to learn that. How many nodes did you say got added for Brexit?
6,000 nodes.
6,000 nodes. I mean, how do you do that with the on-prem model? I believe that it's nearly impossible to do. But you touched initially on some important aspects of the net message, the common message between Rohit and you is that your processes, your way of looking at things changes when you are on cloud versus when you are on-prem. The governance changes, your architecture, cloud ops, engineering, and you should move together as a family. So those are some of the recommendations coming from IDFC. Now moving on, Deepak, how about you? What would you say are the do's and the don'ts and challenges of cloud?
Well, I think most of the points are touched upon by Shashank. Rohit talked about scaling. Saumer talked about governance and security aspects, which are very critical. Let me just touch upon a couple of things. One, I think most banks will imminently face the skilling problem, and we also face the skilling problem. When we did an internal survey, we figured that maybe less than 5% of our workforce were cloud literate. Okay, that's an important hurdle to sort of get over, because embracing cloud is hugely daunting and you have to have the necessary skills. And we solved it by partnering with learning providers. There are many good quality learning providers who offer quality courses on cloud, including some of the service providers, right? So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is a bit engineering related, right? What are some of the implementation hurdles? How do you segregate your production vis-a-vis non-production workloads? How do you map it to the availability zones of the service provider? If you are running virtual private clouds, how do you map the workloads to corresponding to your VPC setups? Security groups, creating access control layers, and these are all the very, very boring bits. But if you really want to get to cloud, you have to focus on the boring bits. Saumer talked about the VACA scans, threat assessment, vulnerability, aspects of your application security, aspects. These are things that you cannot shy away from. RBI itself has a working committee on cloud technologies, and there are master directions, and there's a gazillion best practices out there. But the good news, Ekhlaque, is that all these service providers have top-notch documentation. They're very, very good quality knowledge assets, extremely good, very user-friendly, documentation. There are also free sources. YouTube is the best source for you to go learn anything about anything and everything about cloud. So again, like I said, leveraging cloud is as much as about taking the bold move, but also about doing the boring bits and getting it right.
Thank you very much for that insight, Deepak. You said very clearly there is a lot of grunt work, which you are referring to as boring work, that needs to be done, and it is around governance, processes, controls, without which your entire cloud deployment can become chaotic and very difficult to manage. Thank you very much, Rohit, Deepak, and Shashank, for your insights on do's and don'ts about the cloud. My last question would be to our member from Intel. And during the introduction, I did say we have somebody with the inside Intel. And my question is, give us the inside Intel on how is Intel preparing organizations for transformation to multi-cloud environment.
And thanks, Ekhlaque, for asking that. I was very encouraged to see the focus on infrastructure that Rohit and Shashank and Deepak talked about, right? I think, as I started off saying, cloud is an operational model, and every journey is individual and customized. So you talk, and what happens is when you're talking about a single cloud phase one or a multi-cloud phase two or the whole interoperable seamless phase three, the issues are different. Okay, so if you think about a single cloud or a couple of cloud conversation, Shashank touched upon the issue about, hey, look, how do I do my CPU and memory footprint, right? So if you think about it, and by the way, you started off saying ERP is one of the workloads. Now think about SAP HANA, which is one of the most moving workloads people are talking about. Now, if you look at SAP HANA, we actually have a technology called Optane DC persistent memory. Okay, now if you do a vanilla SAP HANA implementation, let's take a 6 terabyte database. It takes 50 minutes to get the database on your DRAM booting up. Cost-wise lower, you use DC persistent memory. It takes 4 minutes. So it's not talking about 10%, 20%. We're talking about 12x improvement on technology. Again, when you talk about in phase one, the issues are more around cost, uptime, what have responsiveness, and we work on technology around those for phase one. Now coming to phase two, if you really look at it, Ekhlaque, and I'm talking about a couple of clouds, and I talked about the issue about vulnerability, security, right? So what are the biggest things that's phase two, in our observation, customers are looking at? One is uptime, okay? Second, we talk about data localization, data sovereignty, okay? If some of you who have actually experienced Microsoft Azure, if in the conversation, we have something called software guarded extensions, which actually creates a trusted enclave in the public cloud for organizations to execute their code and data, so it is not open to vulnerability. Okay, so for us, it is not about just creating a technology. For us, it's about working with the partners and enabling that. And SGX is something Azure is promoting today. Now you talk about, this whole data sovereignty, data localization. A lot of countries are coming up with that, right? What do we provide? We provide something called a trusted execution technology. What does it do? It lets you physically attest a server that you're at. So it just addresses your question off the bat. Again, this is very specifically to phase 2 customers, right? Because what you are dealing with is an individual journey, and you have to link to that. Finally, when you talk about phase 3, interoperability, governance, what have you. By the way, we are a very big supporter of open, because as you think about this journey, you have to always have the best of breed, right? How do you go through the best of breed journey? So we are always working with the open system, the open ecosystem. Somebody touched upon OpenStack, but we work with frameworks like OpenVINO, OpenNest. I'm sure people are talking about PyTorch. You'll realize that if you use PyTorch vanilla versus something that is optimized and for free on the Intel side, you'll get a 3.7x performance improvement just for free. So we work at, first of all, at the technology level, as I say, depending on the phase. The second part of the conversation, Ekhlaque, is architecture is changing, right? The latency requirements, the way the governance are coming in, the different architectures we're looking at. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but what we observe is one of the largest social media providers. Today, we're all talking microservices, right? If people are considering microservices, the overhead for managing these microservices at times is higher than the computational requirement, right? So the question is, if you took a vanilla CPU conversation, will that be applicable? Probably not the best answer for your question. But we have now introduced something called infrastructure processing unit, because we see it as a heterogeneous system of different components, different cores, different capabilities, sometimes GPU, sometimes CPU, sometimes memory, as I talked about. How do this work together? So at an architecture level, we're working through it. And by the way, all this capabilities is just not Intel saying and coming and talking to you. We work with the partner ecosystem. So it comes down to technologies, architecture, and finally, we are privileged and honored to say that, whether it's AWS, whether it's Azure, whether it's HP, take your pick. At the hardware level, we work with all as partners and customers. We work a lot, as I said, with SAP and Oracle. Depending on your workload, there are capabilities out there that we have worked with a partner ecosystem, because our intention is to provide the best of breed. And finally, as I said, we do a lot of software. Okay, I talked about the OpenVINO framework. It's visual inference and neural optimization. For people who are looking at edge capabilities, think about it. I talked about PyTorch. We have our own match kernel libraries for TensorFlow. So think about those capabilities. So we work at that ecosystem level to make it available so that we can work and provide the best, not only for your customers, but actually your customers' customers, because we are happy only when you can solve those issues, right? Because you're about your businesses. So that's what I'd say, Ekhlaque. Think about the technologies. It's okay to look under the hood. Probably you'll find cost benefits out there. Think about how we can partner on an ecosystem perspective, and think about the architecture, because architecture is changing very fast, especially with 5G coming in.
Thank you so much, Saumer.
I have a
think
point.
about the ecosystem. Think about the ecosystem. That was the Rohit, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think Saumer can't agree with you more. I think it's very important that we look under the hood, and it doesn't hurt. It actually helps a lot. So if we just look under the hood and see certain details of it, it saves not only money, time, effort, frustration, all of that. Because if you just knew that a little bit ahead, you wouldn't have made that wrong decision. And every organization will have its own nuances. It's important for us to know why we want certain thing, and then look at under the hood, and with that mindset, okay, this is what I wanted. This is what I'm looking forward to. Let me see what do I have under the hood to leverage to get to where I want to get to.
Right, and whether it makes sense for me or not when you look under the hood.
Absolutely.
Right. So ecosystem. Think about the architecture. Look under the hood. See the key themes, and we're going to be wrapping up this panel discussion. But the key things emerging are: first, cloud doesn't seem like an option. It is a necessity. If you don't go into the cloud, you will be forced out of competition and the market and the industry. That's clearly been established. The second one is clearly coming out. It is a journey. Do not look at one thing is today I'm not on cloud, tomorrow I'm on cloud. It is a maturity journey. Eventually, it ends up in a multi-cloud environment. operating a cloud comes with its own nuances and own sets of challenges, and they need to be addressed. It's not like, okay, on-prem I had to look after humidity, temperature, fire control, and cloud mein yaar mera koi responsibility nahi hai. It isn't like that. There's a shared responsibility. There's a responsibility for you to get into the details. As Rohit said, look under the hood, ecosystem thinking, put those governance mechanisms in place so that you are able to make the best out of cloud. But without any doubt, cloud brings a lot of advantages, a lot of agility, a lot of scalability, which every organization today can benefit from. Thank you very much, gentlemen and panelists, for a wonderful and a very enriching panel discussion. I'm glad that I was the facilitator and I got to hear something. I'm going to take the lessons away from this panel discussion. Thank you once again. Over to you, Bhavna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ekhlaque, for that wonderful moderation.